From the demented mind behind Cross-Psychopath, Ferals, and Yellow Belly comes one of the most unhinged horror stories ever written. Today, we march back to the early days of the Roman Empire, where a brutal slaughter sparks the flames of vengeance and launches a revenge quest soaked in blood, bile, and imperial madness. And at the center of it all, the most decadent, dangerous man in all of Rome, the Mad Emperor, known only as Caligula.
Actually, according to Suetonius, Caligula was a nickname, which meant little—
Shut the f*** up, nerd! 100% historically accurate!
Sup guys, I'm your host, Juan, and today we'll be diving into Caligula by David Lapham, with art done by Germán Nóbile. Caligula was published by Avatar Press in 2011, and today we are actually covering both Caligula and its sequel, Caligula, Heart of Rome. So grab your milk duds and take a seat, cause it's gonna be a long one. Also, this is your final warning. Today's story is probably the most depraved one on the entire channel. And I don't mean in the gore sense, if you catch my drift. But before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel in order to stay in the loop with all the latest videos. Alrighty then, let's jump right in. Our story opens on a Roman house slave scurrying toward his master's quarters. However, when he opens the door, he gets shanked, like he just stepped over a sleeping bag in Seattle at 3 a.m. But in this case, the slave has just been impaled by some imperial soldiers, who next ransack the house, dragging the homeowners into the main room. The occupants include a woman named Julia, her son Herminius, and his wife and son. Julia spots the house slave bleeding out and lets out a shrill cry and falls on her knees, rushing toward him. As this happens, she is taunted by two upper-class Romans, who giggle at her like hyenas. Julia curses them out, but then she's interrupted by a pointed cough, and when she realizes the man who is responsible, she immediately begs for forgiveness. Standing before her, clad in purple robes, is the Emperor of Rome. It's Caligula. In a booming voice, he asks Julia why she cares about a lowly slave when a quote-unquote golden god stands now before her. Julia stammers out an apology and shakily asks him if he needs some shelter or food or anything. The two gentry gleefully laugh as Caligula responds that today is Julia's lucky day, as she's about to be graced by the divine. With tear-stained eyes, Julia timidly looks up at her emperor, as he bluntly tells her to take off her clothes and spread herself out on the table. We don't see what happens next, but we do see the consequences, and I think you get the idea. After Caligula and the Romans took turns with Julia, they beheaded everyone in the household. And to add insult to injury, before they left, they also went to the bathroom all over the house. But what the intruders didn't know is that there was actually one more member of the family that they didn't kill, and we are introduced to him. His name is Junius, and he is our main protagonist. You see, Junius's family were humble olive farmers, and he was at the market selling their product when this all went down. When he finally returned home, he found the dying house slave, who, with his last breath, told him everything, including the brutal violations of his mom and brother. And so, Junius forces himself to stare at his mother's desecrated body. Fear, grief, and rage flow through him as he rigidly stands there. Hours pass, and all Junius can focus on is one name: Caligula. His mind then drifts to the memory of his father, a brave military commander who Junius knows would have avenged his family if he were still alive. So, Junius knows what he must do next. He walks out the front door, which has on it a nailed notification about the property being abandoned, and our protagonist sets ablaze what was once his home, and he sets off on a mule for the great city of Rome. When Junius finally arrives, his breath is taken away by the sheer size and magnitude of the city. The only other place this farmer boy had ever been to was the market, so all of this is more than he's ever known or seen. For that reason, he feels like a stranger in Rome, an outsider who clearly doesn't belong. So Junius rents a small room and spends the next few weeks acclimating to the city and plotting his revenge. He has carefully studied from afar the imperial palace where the emperor lives, and he's noted the extreme difficulty of getting in. Guards line the perimeter and thoroughly search everyone for weapons before they're allowed inside. The only workaround, so far as Junius can tell, is by bribing some of the less virtuous and more corrupt guardsmen. But our hero just doesn't have that kind of money. So he begins following a few of them in the hopes of finding something to work with here. And this takes Junius to a bathhouse that the guard he's tailing visits every afternoon. But this isn't just any old bathhouse. No, it's replete with young boys, supplied by a local brothel, who mirthfully consort with all the higher status men. I believe the kids these days refer to this as a ditty party. Anyway, Junius sees that the guard is quite clearly fond of slender boys, but before he can act, a man brusquely marches through the steam with a stern look on his face. It's the guardsman's boss, a no-nonsense commander named Laurentius. And well, Laurentius slaps the shit out of the guard, and that's pretty much the end of that. But Junius isn't ready to give up yet. So that night, when the guard is back on duty, he submissively walks up to the palace entrance. Junius tells the guard he's there to see Caligula, and he offers him a jar of olive oil, promising that it tastes good. However, the guard replies that he's not going to be the one tasting anything. And so Junius is forced to orally service the guardsmen. Obviously, Junius isn't feeling the greatest right now, but at least he's permitted to enter the palace, and he's astounded by its majestic ornaments. But this pure wonder is quickly dissipated after the olive farmer hears a strange sound, and he discovers what is for YouTube quite literally unspeakable acts going on between a woman and a canine behind a pillar. Yeah, it's going to be one of those types of stories if you didn't catch on yet. Anyway, Junius starts vomiting right as the fresh shouts of a man and a woman ring through the halls. It's a shrieking half-naked woman sprinting away as a man's voice calls out after her to halt. And she happens to run right into Junius, knocking them both on the ground. And then, striding up after her, comes the fearful stature of the Emperor Caligula himself. Junius cannot believe his eyes, as the man thanks him and tells the woman she put up a good chase before he gets down and has sex with her. That the man he was just pursuing happened to fall directly into his lap leaves Junius feeling like this was an act of divine providence, so he quickly grips onto the knife he had hidden in the jar, and he lunges at the Emperor. With all his might, the farmer plunges the knife through the top of Caligula's head. The Emperor's face goes blank, and he starts twitching, and Junius yells that was for his mother. However, to Junius's indescribable horror, Caligula slowly turns his head and orders the boy to fetch him a towel because it appears his nose is running. Junius is catatonic, and the Emperor calls him an idiot and grabs onto his sleeve, wiping his nose with it. He then realizes there's a knife in his skull, so he pulls it out and hands it to the stunned Junius, telling him to get rid of it. The knife just slips out of the farmer's hands like butter, though, and he hangs his head in defeat, anticipating his imminent execution. However, Caligula, by all appearances, doesn't seem to realize that Junius just tried to assassinate him. Instead, the madman starts calling Junius Felix, because he's the emperor's lucky boy. In fact, Caligula tells our protagonist that he's coming with him to the races tomorrow, and that he has a losing streak right now, and they better turn that around and win for his sake. And so, the next day, the two go to the racetrack, and it's filled with fast-paced, adrenaline-pumping spectacles. The crowd roars with excitement, and their energy seems to shake the entire city. And it is here where Junius feels, for the first time, that he begins to lose himself. Whatever the case, though, his thoughts are interrupted by the abrupt appearances of those cackling members of Caligula's entourage from the beginning. The woman's name is Nera, and the man's name is Marcus. Junius knows who they are and what they've done, so a fiery hatred begins to envelop him. But then Caligula butts in, idly remarking that he's bored. Junius tells him that this is the first time he's ever been to the races, which prompts the emperor to smirk and say, "Well, they better make it memorable then." And so he straight up chains our hero to the front of a chariot, assuring the lad that it's okay because his favorite horse, the jet black Incitatus, will be leading, and Incitatus never loses. That doesn't exactly reassure Junius, but there's not much he can do about it. And anyway, a voice calls out for Caligula, and it's Laurentius, the super serious commander guy from earlier. He tells the emperor that the crowd is out of control, and he entreats the leader to ensure there's not going to be another riot, as at the last one over 900 people died. Caligula makes a half-assed promise, and Laurentius walks away, and Junius can tell that the soldier deeply despises the emperor. But he ain't got time to think about that shit, though, because in a matter of minutes, the race is fully set up and ready to go. Caligula introduces the special race, explaining that each chariot has a mascot tied to it as a good luck charm, and that the winner of the race will be awarded lots of money and even Roman citizenship if they don't already have it. Also, no one can hear you without a microphone, jackass. Anyway, Caligula gives the go-ahead and the race is off. The stakes are incredibly high, so the game is extra sweaty. The charioteers keep sabotaging each other, and people's bodies are getting crushed and ripped apart. Junius, for his part, is just screaming. But then, an almost supernatural persuasion floats over him. There is this indescribable cold and evil force emanating from Incitatus, and before Junius even realizes what's happening, his chariot is the last remaining one, and they've already secured the victory. Junius feels overwhelmed with joy, and he's incredibly grateful, and afterwards he expresses that gratitude by making out with the emperor. He tells himself that he's doing all this to get close to Caligula and to find out his true weakness, but yeah. Regardless, Caligula confirms that Junius can write because he wants the farmer to follow him around and record the story of his exalted life. And, says the emperor, if Junius is to adequately catalog his life, he must first learn to live as he does. And I guess that translates to them lying in bed naked together. Junius watches Caligula as he sleeps, and visions of his dead mother fill his head. But the emperor seems immortal, and he might actually be a god. So what is to be done? But that thought is interrupted, because the emperor abruptly sits up, turns to Junius, and frantically whispers that he sought only to live, but not like this. He then begs the boy for help, his voice all the while rising, culminating in a scream for Junius to kill him before it's too late. Caligula demands Junius to find something, but the boy doesn't know what, and he leaps out of bed, only to return in confusion. And when he does, the emperor's back is now turned to him. Junius asks if he's okay, but Caligula starts incoherently mumbling about how the one true God sent a good man to Israel, and about how he entered the world after nailing that man to a cross. Caligula begins maniacally laughing, nonstop like a machine, and then the midnight stallion, Incitatus, clops into the room. Junius recoils in fear as the horse, in a husky voice, inquires if Junius is good in the sack, before the scene ultimately fades to black. We pick back up the very next day as Junius dejectedly roams the street of Rome. He's pretty fucked up, and in the process of recovering from the last night's events. There's really no easy way to say this, but yeah, he got stretched out by the horse. So Junius has been taking hot baths to recover, and it's there where he encounters Caligula, who chides him, telling him, there, that wasn't so bad. Junius asks him how it's possible that Incitatus could speak and do all the horrible things he did, but Caligula responds by holding the boy's head underwater and beating him, telling the lad that those are perverted delusions and it never happened. And so life goes on and weeks pass. Junius is now firmly entrenched in the emperor's orbit, and he now gets drunk every day and frequently visits the palace brothel in order to forget about his problems. And there, one day, he encounters Marcus, Caligula's goon who participated in the destruction of his mother. A surge of rage floods Junius's mind, and he begins stalking the inebriated Marcus as he stumbles his way back home. However, our hero is unexpectedly accosted by a random prostitute who keeps loudly asking him if he's trying to hit or not. Junius tells her to fuck off, but all this noise attracts the attention of Marcus, who recognizes our hero and asks him what the hell he's doing. The prostitute shrieks that Junius was following him, so Marcus turns around and starts running, but Junius sprints after him and shoves a sword through his chest. Blood spurts out of the wound, and Marcus falls on his knees and then collapses. All the while, Junius raves about how he's going to find and kill that Nero woman next, and about how he's avenging his family. But then, Junius starts slightly swaying back and forth, and his vision gets a little blurry, and he winds up completely passing out. He wakes up 3 days later in fine bedding made of purple silk. He's super confused, of course, and even more confused when he notices the naked Nera eagerly watching him. You see, she really wants to find out what the Emperor sees in Junius, but her prying is halted by the unexpected arrival of Laurentius, who tells Nera that Caligula is demanding of her. So she leaves in disappointment, and Junius tries to catch up to Laurentius because he knows he's an honorable man, and Junius needs help badly. But when Junius locates Laurentius, he finds that the man appears to be signaling to a distant ship on the horizon. But before our protagonist can look into the matter, Caligula bounces onto the scene, elated that his aide is finally awake. Apparently, something big is going on, and the Emperor orders pen and parchment for the boy. And so we pan out, and we see that they are on a massive ornate ship somewhere in the sea. But even more awe-inspiring than that is that there is an astonishing floating bridge utilizing hundreds of ships strung together in a line. And now Caligula intends to ride his horse across the interminable bridge, a momentous feat he needs detailed recordings of by his scribe. So they set off, and it goes smoothly at first, until that strange boat in the distance comes closer and veers directly into the bridge, splintering it in a loud groan. Subsequently, several armed assassins leap onto the scene, shouting for the death of the tyrant Caligula. But immediately, things start going wrong. Incitatus punts a guy's head off, and when one of them slashes the horse with his blade, out of the wound bursts a legion of maggots. The larvae launch themselves into the eyes and mouths of the attackers, and the maggots forcefully burrow themselves into the men's skin as well. It's pretty gross. In any case, amidst the chaos, Junius spots Laurentius, of all people, among the assassins, and the commander is about to charge at Caligula when Junius jumps in the way, intercepting the soldier. The farmer boy urges Laurentius to sit and observe as an attacker jabs his weapon into Caligula's calf. The emperor looks down contemptuously at the man as if he were only a fly, and so now the truth is clear, and both Laurentius and Junius understand that the imperator is much more than man. Despite everything, Caligula still stands, but he's seething now, fuming at the contemptible betrayal that just befell him. And so Caligula bellows out that the time for niceties has passed, and now so begins the reign of blood. From there, we jump in time over a month later. They're all still hanging out on the imperial boat, as Caligula has refused to set foot in Rome out of paranoia and rage. In the interim, he has been hosting these dinner parties to test loyalties. And this very evening, there is to be another one, and it promises to be quite the spectacle, as the emperor has really lost his mind and has somehow become even more deranged than before. And right now he's welcoming his party guests, which are made up of senators and their wives. He shouts at them to get on their fucking knees, and then he proceeds to urinate on one of the senators' faces. Caligula then introduces the object of the evening. You see, everyone's here tonight to play a murder game. I'm not going to get too deep into the minutia of this game, as we have a lot to get to. But yeah, moving along. Anyway, Junius is there too, of course, serving a dual role as both game master and recorder of the night's events. Right now, though, his mind has wandered back to a conversation he had with Laurentius a month ago in the wake of the failed assassination attempt. The two agreed to work together, and Junius promised to closely watch the emperor in order to find out a weakness. But whatever the case, Caligula snaps our protagonist back to present-day reality. Junius reads out the game rules, which basically involve the senators sleeping with each other's wives, with one of the guests also playing a murderer who has to get caught. Don't worry about it, though. As for now, to get the party started, Caligula seizes one of the senator's wives and takes off with her, much to her husband's discomfort. And after that, to make a long matter short, Junius reads to the guests the rest of the instructions and they all fuck off. So the olive farmer returns to his real mission, tailing Caligula. He slowly pulls back one of the emperor's bed curtains, and what he sees is truly shocking. It's Caligula, with his entire forearm deep inside the dead body of the senator's wife. The madman is savagely digging around in her for something, and eventually he finds it. Caligula steadily extracts a blue orb-like thing from her, and he places it into a silver box, which she then swallows. And as for Junius, yeah, he nopes the fuck out of there, trying to subdue his panic on the ship deck. His mind slips into a flashback of when he was writing down the game instructions the Emperor was dictating to him. Apparently, Junius had absent-mindedly wrote down that he was to kill Nera in the game, which Caligula read and gave his approval to. In any event, soon enough the appointed hour hits, and everyone reconvenes in the hall, where, at the center of the room, cooking like a pig, is the senator Caligula pissed on earlier. The Emperor announces to the guests that the feast has begun, and whoever eats the most of the senator gets to live. So they desperately rush to the center and start clumsily jabbing their fork into the man's flesh. But then their meal starts shifting and screaming, because he's not dead yet. That doesn't seem to matter to the guests, though, as they keep tearing away at the man before they simply turn on each other, up until the point where there's only one of them left remaining. Caligula congratulates the traumatized winner and sends them off. And through all this, Nera sluggishly lies back and cackles at all the carnage on display. Junius sees this, and he silently creeps up to her, and he firmly jabs a knife through her throat before she can even react. The boy starts hyperventilating, and Caligula appears over his shoulder, easing the lad and telling him that his mother had a lovely soul. Junius collapses at the emperor's feet, thanking him over and over again. And we're told that in that moment, Junius really did love Caligula. We jump ahead again, this time by a full 9 months. Caligula has plunged into dark depths even his worst detractors couldn't have imagined. He's gone full tyrant mode. He has brought back Tiberius's treason trials and the crucifixions. He has wasted billions on various stunts and indulgences, decimating the Roman economy. The emperor even now dresses up as different gods and rapes random women in the streets. Caligula has also officially made Incitatus a senator, something he allegedly actually did in real life. The senators all protest this, of course, but they are quickly quelled by the horse, who directly speaks to them. "Friends, Romans, countrymen, drop your robes and form a line." Also in the last 9 months, Caligula has developed a hateful obsession with Jews, and he has launched massive campaigns against them, which has forced him to raise taxes to fund, despite the heavy burden on the citizens, and their obvious displeasure and ruin. Amidst all the insanity, Junius has been secretly meeting up with Laurentius. The farmer tells the soldier everything he knows, including about the mysterious silver box Caligula swallowed. Laurentius thinks that must be the key to defeating the emperor, so he presses Junius to do whatever he can to get his hands on it. Time is running short because, as Laurentius reveals, there is a conspiracy brewing among contingents of the army, the Senate, and the landed gentry. They are planning a coordinated revolt against the emperor, and Laurentius and Junius both know what their efforts will amount to if they are unable to figure out the key to Caligula's immortality. And should a plot against him fail once again, the citizens of Rome and the world at large will undoubtedly be put through a misery that they may not well survive. So Junius gets to work, and he tries buttering the emperor up. However, the man catches on instantly, and he accuses his aide of trying to get him drunk. Caligula grips Junius's neck and pins him down, demanding to know who he's conspiring with. Junius chokes out that he was only curious because he saw what the emperor did to that woman on the ship when he pulled something out of her. Caligula lets the boy go, and he reveals that he knows full well who and what Junius is. He knows that it was Junius who stabbed him in the head way back then. He's known this entire time. The emperor then calls Junius weak and a coward. He points out that the farmer had to be drunk to kill Marcus, and he needed Caligula's permission to kill Nera. In short, he's nothing but a fucking NPC. Junius realizes that he's right, but Caligula tells him to get dressed because he's about to show the kid everything. And with that, a guardsman promptly drags in a shackled slave, tossing him before the emperor. Caligula looks at the man before handing a sharpened blade to Junius, commanding the boy to kill the slave. Junius obliges, and then, on the emperor's orders, he dismembers and mutilates the man, rearranging the body parts into the shape of, well, I think it speaks for itself. Caligula then starts rambling about some esoteric demonology shit, but remember, the Romans were pagans at this time, and none of that sort of stuff was part of that tradition. Likewise, Caligula starts talking about the soul, which confuses Junius because that's not a Roman pagan concept, but rather a Platonic and later Christian one. Whatever the case, He tells Junius to locate the soul in the monstrosity they made, and the boy digs around in the creature until he firmly grasps something, and the creature starts writhing around. And then he manages to do it. Junius pulls out the blue orb thing, which is the man's soul. Caligula, for his part, gurgles, and he vomits the silver box back out. Junius hands him the soul, and he tenderly places it into the box before he swallows it once again. The Emperor then turns to his aide and delivers a speech. He says that he demands complete love and devotion, and in return, Junius will receive freedom from worry, guilt, suffering, and from even having to be anything at all. He can give himself up to something greater, and therefore become something greater. Junius realizes that he's at a crossroads, and he doesn't know what to say. In any event, he makes another midnight sojourn with Laurentius at their rendezvous location, and there Junius breaks down, and he clearly explains everything that wasn't explicitly stated earlier. Namely, that Caligula is possessed by a thing called a demon, which is a Judeo-Christian concept, meaning it's new to them. The story goes that when Pontius Pilate killed Christ in Judea, as he bled, his blood awoke deep, dark, and terrible forces from way down below. And now the demons are here, and one of them has taken hold of the Emperor. And when it's hungry, the demon forces Caligula to capture a soul and place it within the box. And in return, the man is granted supernatural abilities. Junius hesitates for a moment, and then he sadly repeats what the Emperor said about him as well, that he's nothing but a weak and cowardly bystander. Laurentius cuts him off and firmly says no. Junius, a mere olive farmer, came all the way to Rome for the first time in his life, and, all on his own, infiltrated the palace and confronted the most powerful man in the world in order to avenge his family's honor. And so, Laurentius says, if Junius is not brave, then he's never known bravery at all. The lad's face brightens a little, and the soldier continues on, now sharing the pertinent details of the forthcoming conspiracy. The attack is happening the very next day, during a personal theater performance in front of the Emperor, and so the success of this mission is completely contingent on Junius having the box. The boy contemplates for a moment, and then he says that while he doesn't currently have it, he thinks he can get it. And so we transition to the next day, and it's quite a hectic one, with a lot of players moving about the board. An insurrectionist senator leads a group of undercover assassins around the palace under the guise of being a guided tour. And simultaneously, a bunch of rebel imperial guardsmen and soldiers run about the palace, getting into position. And filing into the main hall is the acting troupe, who are completely unaware of the conspiracy and are getting ready to perform in front of the Emperor. But only two men, Junius and Laurentius, know that the rebellion will amount to nothing if they can't get their hands on Caligula's box. Fortunately, our hero runs into the Emperor, who asks the boy if he thought about the thing they discussed before. Junius replies yes, and that he wants to do it again, right now. Meanwhile, knowing just how deadly the horse is, Laurentius has been tasked with single-handedly confronting Incitatus and stopping the beast from aiding his master. So Laurentius puts on a brave face as the monster taunts him. He stares into Incitatus's burning red eyes and raises his spear for battle, and the two collide in epic warfare. The soldier slashes the hide of the beast, and a swarm of maggots flood out at him. Laurentius plants his feet, and he blocks the concentrated force. He then douses over the maggots, either olive oil or some kind of naphtha. Incitatus snorts, and remarks that if Laurentius knew what he was, he would know that he can't die. The Roman responds that he knows that Caligula can't die, but if the beast too was immortal, he doubts it would be the one serving the emperor. He then grasps onto an oil lamp and throws it on top of the fluid, igniting a massive fire. Incitatus charges at him and rapidly kicks at the man, shattering his shield. Laurentius is knocked back directly into the fire. The beast laughs, but the man gets back up and rushes at the horse, delivering a deep strike. The horse howls in pain, and Laurentius, with a half-seared face, utters out a war cry as he plunges his weapon into the demon over and over again until the monster collapses and finally ceases moving. The soldier stares at the carcass and attempts to catch his breath, but he ultimately crumbles, tumbling backwards into the pool. Unfortunately, back upstairs, things are going less swimmingly for Junius. He's been getting beaten and lashed by the emperor, and the torture is only ended when Junius promises Caligula that he loves him, and he's ready to give up his own identity to him. Caligula is pleased by this, and he claps his hands, and a guard brings in 4 actors, who the emperor insists are Junius's deceased family. That is to say, the demon tricks Junius into thinking he's among his own kin. In any case, Caligula removes his laurel wreath and places it atop Junius's head, and he whispers to the farmer that his mother had such a juicy, plump soul. And then, under the emperor's provocations, Junius starts beating the actor he thinks is his mother, before escalating to angrily strangling her. Caligula hands Junius a blade, and he eviscerates her body. And after a painful search, he triumphantly pulls out her soul, and Caligula spews back up the occult box. The emperor stretches out his hand, impatiently waiting for Junius to give him the soul. But the boy hesitates, and then, before Caligula can react, our hero snatches the box and sprints away as fast as his legs will carry him. The emperor lets out a roar, and in an incalculable wrath, shrieks at the guards to stop the thief at once. But then Caligula hears a rapid shuffling and metal clanking sounds behind him. The tyrant's eyes grow wide as he slowly turns around to face a dozen angry faces, brandishing weapons and staring him down. Caligula looks at them and calls them a bunch of gamer words and tells them they have no idea what the fuck they're doing. But the mob isn't listening, and they trip over themselves, attacking the emperor in an incoherent fury. And without his box and the demonic powers that come with it, Caligula dies just like any man. Soon thereafter, Caligula's doddering uncle, Claudius, was proclaimed emperor, and the sky seemed to brighten over the magnificent city of Rome. More time passes, and we are once again reunited with our heroes. Junius has been laying low for some time now, but he receives an unexpected visitor. It's Laurentius, who has made a full recovery, save for the 3rd-degree burn marks plastered across his face. But the soldier is elated to see the boy, as he has been looking for him for a while now. He hands Junius a parchment with the ownership rights to his family's farm, and he tells the lad that the city is no place for him and to go back home. Junius profusely thanks the man for, well, everything really, and they exchange a firm Roman handshake. But before he departs, Laurentius asks Junius what he did with the box. The humble farmer pauses and answers that he smashed it with a rock and threw the pieces into the sea. Laurentius nods approvingly, and he leaves the young man to himself. But something's not quite right. Junius wryly smirks, and he tears back his bedsheets, revealing a vandalized body he has just killed. Junius's head shoots back, and he begins retching, vomiting up the silver box, which reads on it in Latin, "I am not mortal man. I am Caligula." And with that, the first chapter of the Caligula saga concludes on a cliffhanger.
Stop! Did you hear the news? This channel is now running the YouTube membership program. That's right, for just $1.99 a month, you are granted special access to some absolutely epic perks, such as early access to videos, some really cool emojis, and a loyalty badge next to your name. But not only that, by signing up you are actually helping to build up the community, as well as keeping the lights on around here. I've actually been using this sweatshirt as a kind of flashlight lately. But in any case, I thank you for the consideration, and now let's get back to the video.
And we're back, and we're now ready to embark onto the sequel to the Caligula miniseries, Caligula, Heart of Rome. Things start getting a little complicated here, but don't worry, I gotcha. The story opens exactly 7 years after the final scene of the first volume. In that time span, authorities have found 56 body horror displays left behind on the public streets of Rome. And you're looking at one right now. The head investigator of these ghastly crimes is none other than the grizzled and powerful commander, Laurentius, who, not gonna lie, kinda looks like he's cosplaying as Freddy Krueger these days with those gnarly facial burns. Anyway, Laurentius has been doing this for several years now, so he knows what he's looking at and what it does. So he carefully sticks his hand into the creature's mouth. Instantaneously, his breath begins to freeze, and his skin erupts in goosebumps. And then, the soldier's mind or being is basically transported into another dimension. Think of it like those Soul Stone scenes in Avengers. Laurentius finds himself in a bed, beside a mutilated woman, her body all twisted and reconfigured in all the wrong ways. Laurentius cries out and jerks his hand back, severing contact with the corpse and returning back to reality. It turns out that the woman Laurentius sees whenever he touches these ritual corpse things is his own wife, Julia, who we find out was murdered in much the same way just a couple of years ago. But as for now, the commander regains his bearing and he orders his men to burn the body, getting rid of it as if it never existed. Not even the Emperor Claudius knows the extent of these crimes. In any event, later on, Laurentius sits down and confers with his most trusted compatriot, a younger man named Aulus. Pretty much no one believes Laurentius about the whole demons and souls thing, except for Aulus, or so it seemed up till now, because the lad reveals that he's actually been approached by a representative for an Agrippina, the incredibly wealthy widow, who also happens to be Caligula's sister. Apparently, Agrippina wants to meet Laurentius, and she's willing to devote unlimited funds to hunting the demon that's roaming around the city, killing people. You see, she claims to have reason to believe that the fiend is soon coming after her 10-year-old son, Nero. So Laurentius makes the trip out to her estate, where he meets the royal woman, famed for her beauty across the empire. Agrippina has been living in exile for some time now, after her own failed attempt to assassinate Caligula. In any case, she introduces Laurentius to a freed slave named Pallas, and they get down to business. Pallas is the guy with the white hair, by the way. Moving along, Laurentius asks the woman what she wants with him, and Agrippina responds that she wants him to quit his post and work for her full-time, hunting down the demon that possessed her brother. And if he succeeds, she will reward him with enough wealth to last generations. Laurentius looks at her and inquires why she's so certain she's got something to fear here. Agrippina glances around her and beckons for the man to get closer. She then whispers in his ear that while the common belief is that Nero is the son of her first husband, that's not actually the truth. The secret which only she knows, is that Nero's actual father is in fact her brother, the late Emperor Caligula, meaning that the child is the spawn of a demon. We are then subjected to a flashback of Caligula actually forcing himself onto Agrippina, but I think we're good. All you need to know is that when he was done assaulting her, he carved into her skin certain satanic iconography, such as an inverted cross. Agrippina, ignorant to its meaning, shows such scarring off to Pallas, who she's been sleeping with, by the way. Laurentius has already left at this point, having agreed to her terms, and she is now plotting with the white-haired man. You see, the pair aren't exactly who or what they claim to be. Agrippina has concealed from Laurentius her true motives for hiring him. She does want the Caligula demon dead and gone, for good this time, but only because she's worried that it's planning to regain power, denying her beloved Nero his rightful birthright to the empire. And as for Pallas, the shocking truth is that he's actually a different demon entirely. One with their own hitherto unknown agenda, completely separate from the Caligula demon. Also, he has 8 nipples, a hand where his dick is supposed to be, and a grotesque mouth with jagged teeth embedded in his lower abdomen. And from that mouth protrudes a long penis tongue thing. I'm not even sure what to censor here. Oh god, let's just move on. From there, we do a hard cut to the middle of a gladiatorial arena, where a massive athletic dude wearing a spaghetti strainer on his face is absolutely dominating. The crowd roars in ecstasy, and they begin chanting the gladiator's name over and over again. Varaxis. And brooding in the stadium in a Shark Tank pose is a familiar face. It's Junius. Apparently, the former farmer sponsors gladiators like Varaxis now. Also, he got his ears pierced. I wonder if he got them done at Claire's. Whatever the case, Junius is unexpectedly approached by Laurentius, who he hasn't seen in a number of years. Laurentius chides him for selling his family's olive farm and for settling in Rome. He tells Junius that he knows about his massive debts, but he might well have a solution. And so the soldier proposes hiring Junius to help him hunt down the Caligula demon, and in return, their benefactor will pay off his debt. Junius smiles and agrees to these terms, telling Laurentius to meet him at his apartment the next day. But remember, dear viewer, Junius secretly kept the evil box, meaning he's the culprit running around the city murdering people. Right now, though, he's concerned with the injured state of his prized fighter, Varaxis. So Junius bends his neck and licks the fighter's wounds, instantly healing them, much to the man's silent wonder. We briefly revisit Agrippina and Pallas as they pack up their things and prepare to return to Rome at last. They have a little scheme in the works, you see. As it turns out, the Emperor Claudius's wife is embroiled in a conspiracy against him, and he's expected to find out soon, leaving him no choice but to exile or to execute her. So the plan is for Agrippina to swoop in and be whatever the emperor needs her to be. And this greatly excites Pallas for some reason, and so he straight up starts boning Agrippina right there out in the open. Unfortunately, little Nero catches sight of this from the distance, appraising such indecency with a look of disgust. Meanwhile, back in Rome, Junius has just led Laurentius and his trusted comrade Aulus to an incomplete ritual killing he is claiming to have just now randomly discovered. They all brainstorm as to why the ritual was left unfinished, but they come up with nothing. That is, until Laurentius finds a statue of Minerva underneath the body. And this gives the soldier cause for concern, because through his extensive investigations, he has learned that every victim in the last half-decade have all been Jewish, and Jews don't worship pagan gods. Laurentius and Junius discuss this development in the latter man's dwellings, and it's here as well that Laurentius opens up a little. He shares that he's been kind of lost since his wife Julia was slain by the demon. And so, like Junius, who long ago set about this path in order to avenge his family, now too does Laurentius wholly devote himself to quelling the evil for Julia's sake. Junius nods along, and he tells the man to meet him later that night because he has something to show him. But as for now, Junius apologizes because he's obliged to check in on his fighters down at the stadium. So we follow Junius as he returns backstage. He chats for a moment with Varaxis, but then his eyes grow wide, and he starts unexpectedly belching. Against his will, Junius vomits up the silver box to his immense frustration. Apparently, the demon isn't too pleased about the quality of the last sacrifice, and the box spits out the last deposited soul. Junius, hunched over, urgently screams that he needs a Jew right now at the confused faces staring back at him. And then Varaxis points out that one of his fellow fighters in the room, the one with shaggy hair, he's a Jew. Immediately, Junius desperately launches himself at this Jewish gladiator, wildly swinging his sword at him. But the man's a trained fighter, so he quickly turns the tide, outmatching Junius in combat. He impales the erratic Junius, but just as he's about to deliver the final blow, Varaxis leaps behind him and grabs a hold of the guy's neck, snapping it. Junius madly chuckles, and he orders Varaxis to hand him a dagger. But the star gladiator isn't listening. No, Varaxis instead kneels down and picks up the dropped box, gripping the powerful object in the palm of his hand. Junius starts pathetically whimpering because he knows what's about to happen, and without the box and without the demon, he's as mortal as any man. As that is going on, Agrippina and Nero arrive in Rome. The boy is playing with his lyre, and his mother sits next to him and asks if he knows why they're here. Nero replies that maybe it has something to do with letting Pallas have sex with her. Agrippina backhands the little shit and tells him to never utter those words ever again. Nero bows his head and declares that he does know why they're here. Agrippina has come to seduce and to marry Claudius in a bid to get her son on the throne. But that's not all Nero knows. No, to Agrippina's absolute horror, Nero casually mentions that the demon Caligula was both his father and his uncle. Agrippina is beyond shocked, as it's impossible for the boy to know these things. He looks up innocently at her and discloses that there is this little thing named Belial that speaks to him, and it tells him things he's not supposed to know. A voice that even sometimes tells him what to do. And so the scene ends with us zooming in and seeing that Nero, quite literally, has a hideous demon nestled in his ear, hissing at the boy that he needs to put his mother in her place. Some hours later, we return to the gladiatorial arena, where Varaxis is now swinging around a massive battle axe, absolutely wrecking shit. It's pretty metal, actually. And with a simple flick of his wrist, the warrior cuts through his rival fighters like a hot knife through butter. And watching all this in rapture is the Emperor Claudius and his son Britannicus, as well as Agrippina and her son Nero. Claudius is very impressed with Varaxis' performance, and he promises a reward of his choosing. The gladiator, in a gruff voice, shouts that he only wants one thing: Jews brought to him. Claudius is confused, but Nero, who appears to have a particular fascination with the gladiator, yells out to give them to him. And soon enough, the entire audience joins in and cries out the same thing, eager to see what Varaxis does next. After the games are over, we transition to the imperial palace, where Agrippina enters the emperor's chamber. He tells his niece to come sit on his lap, like the way she used to as a young child. Claudius tells her about how everyone thought he was weak and ineffectual, and that's the only reason he survived long enough to become emperor of Rome. Agrippina looks at him with big eyes, and in a sensual voice assures him that she always thought he was clever. Claudius grunts, and remarks that ever since he had to execute his treacherous ex-wife, Pallas has been trying to convince him that it's in the best interest of the state for him to marry Agrippina. The woman smiles and says that she would be honored to bounce upon her uncle's knee again. You know what I just realized? In this story, Nero's biological dad, Caligula, is also his biological uncle. And soon, Claudius, who is his biological great-uncle, is also about to become his stepfather. Bro, what am I doing with my life? Anyway, we reconnect with Junius, who is leading Laurentius and Aulus into some kind of underground tunnel. The two ask Junius why his hand is bloodied and bandaged, but he only gives them some sort of nebulous answer. The two exchange glances at what has become Junius's increasingly suspect behavior.
Walt, I don't know, man. You've been seeming sus lately. It's almost like we have an imposter among us.
Junius hands torches to Laurentius and Aulus and tells them to follow him down into the deep dark. But the men can tell that something's kind of off, and they get hit by a wave of cold. Laurentius tells Aulus to stay by the entrance, while he follows Junius. However, he only makes it a few steps before slipping into the strange soul world thing. He finds himself back home on a bright and tranquil morning, but he's not alone. Behind him sits his long-deceased wife, Julia, as sweet as the day he lost her. The two discuss Julia's Jewish heritage before there's this flash, and Laurentius sees her severed head staring blankly back at him. Laurentius flinches back to reality, trying to catch his breath and coughing. Aulus is incredibly concerned for his older friend, but Laurentius says to stay back because he's pressing on. Meanwhile, back at the imperial palace, congratulations are in order. Nero has heard that his mom is to marry the emperor, and Agrippina affirms that yes, and she is very happy about it. Nero asks if her happiness is because it would mean that her son is next in line for power, but Agrippina corrects him. Actually, Claudius's own biological son, Britannicus, is still yet the rightful heir. Nero seems pretty surprised to learn this, but Agrippina assures him that she's looking into it. What follows next between the two of them is a sequence so vile that even I won't touch it. We all have our limits, sorry. All you need to know is that Pallas enters the room and Nero leaves it. And then Agrippina asks Pallas why he's not doing anything to protect her. Apparently, the demon in Nero's ear revealed itself to them at some point, surprising even Pallas, despite him being a demon as well. So there's basically three demons. The one Nero has, Pallas, and the Caligula one. Whatever the case, elsewhere, beneath the streets of Rome, it appears that Laurentius has slipped back into the soul realm, and he keeps getting these flashing stills of his life. We learned that, among other things, Laurentius and Julia once had a son who died when he was 3 years old of a fever. We also learn about how Laurentius kind of neglected his wife in the early days of searching for the Caligula demon. Despite knowing that he was putting Julia in danger by provoking the beast, he continued on, and in a way, he sort of chose Rome over his own wife. Of course, Laurentius feels utterly terrible about all of that now, and the self-hatred he feels is now fueling his obsessive hunt for the demon. Laurentius knows that Julia's soul is not at rest. She's out there, somewhere in limbo, and the soldier will not rest until he brings her to peace. Laurentius starts making out with what he thinks is his wife in their bed. However, we find out that in the real world, he's actually locking lips with some amorphous flesh pile deep in the city's underground tunnels. We pan out a little bit and see Junius standing over him, abstractly welcoming him to the heart of Rome. From there, we return to the palace, where Nero finds that the mighty Varaxis has accepted his invitation to meet. Nero is just thrilled to talk to the man, and he offers to play the gladiator a song he wrote about him. No homo, of course. But before Varaxis can answer, he holds himself steady and starts aggressively coughing. Nero barely seems to notice, though, and he prattles on. The boy alerts Varaxis that he wants to buy him, so he asks to speak to his manager. The gladiator responds that the name of his handler is some fucking douchebag named Felix, which of course, that being the name that Caligula bestowed upon Junius, like 45 minutes ago at this point. Anyway, Varaxis says he isn't feeling well and asks to come back another day, much to Nero's disappointment, so he departs. But soon after, Nero is notified by a servant that the fighter started acting oddly, and he was running around. So Nero goes to investigate, and he quickly discovers a dead body in the corridor. The demon in his ear starts screaming at the lad then to go find Varaxis, and so Nero in turn starts losing his shit. As for Varaxis, yeah, he's annihilating the Imperial Guards and brushing off what should be fatal stab wounds. And yeah, the big guy just starts running for his life, like there's a 2-for-1 special at Long John Silver's. Nero eventually winds up finding the rest of the mangled guards, but only long after Varaxis has already left. As the boy ponders all of this, his demon, Belial, whispers that the kid had just stood mere inches from true greatness. Meanwhile, inside the actual palace itself, Agrippina is teaching Britannicus how to play the lyre in front of his father, but she abruptly ends the lesson there, telling the kid to go practice outside because she needs to speak to Claudius in private. When they're alone, Agrippina offhandedly remarks that she taught her son to play that instrument as well. She then trails off and reflects how they're in dark times. She pauses for a moment, and then informs the emperor that there are these murmurs in Rome, that Nero has a purer bloodline than Britannicus, and that he should be the one next in line. Claudius is stunned to hear this, and he asks if Agrippina is seriously trying to convince him to disown his own son in favor of hers. But Agrippina leans in and says, no, quite the opposite. You see, it's only a matter of time until enemies use Nero to subvert Claudius, so Agrippina advises that the wisest course of action would be to end Nero's life while they still can. I know. It's a little bit confusing, but we get a brief flashback which kind of explains Agrippina's shifting motivations. We see that on the day Nero was born, Agrippina worriedly asked Caligula what he was planning to do with their son. And we learned that Caligula responded that he intended to make him miserable every day of his existence. He wanted to beat and belittle Nero at every opportunity, and was already planning ways to fill his heart with raw, black hatred. Caligula further elaborated that he wanted Nero to be the perfect antithesis and complete opposite to everything that the man from Nazareth was, so that, in his own words, on his happiest day, he will burn the world. This, of course, plays into the Christian theory that Nero was an antichrist, but that's beside the point. No, when it comes to understanding why Agrippina wants now to murder her son, we kind of have to read between the lines a little. As for myself, I interpret it that she didn't want to believe Caligula, and she thought Nero could still be saved. But, however, when the demon influencing her son revealed itself, she realized that nothing could be done at this point, especially after already having watched her own brother succumb to this madness. Getting back to the story now, we find Laurentius gripping what he thinks is his wife's hand in the dream world. She is leading him somewhere, but Laurentius is having trouble remembering what's going on or why he's here. But Julia keeps pushing him to move faster, and she keeps muttering that he's so warm. And then it finally all hits for Laurentius, and the memories come flooding back. His wife is dead, and this is some kind of otherworldly phantom trying to sap his vitality for warmth. So the soldier pulls his hand back, and the entire illusion crumbles, and Laurentius is surrounded by screeching husks. But then the monsters begin to burn, and we see that it's Junius cutting the cord and saving Laurentius. And as Laurentius gasps for air, Junius finally comes clean. He tells him that he was the killer they were hunting. He was the one in possession of Caligula's demon, and he was the one who built the heart of Rome, constructed here out of hundreds of cursed corpses. The last thing Laurentius hears before he blacks out is Junius promising to restore him back to full health. Weeks pass before Laurentius wakes up again, and when he does, he's surprised to still be alive. Junius is there, standing over him, and he begins begging for forgiveness, but the soldier isn't having it. Laurentius says that clearly, the kind boy he once knew died the day they took down Caligula. Junius sighs, and states that while he had kept the box and lied about having it, it has since abandoned him, and he doesn't know why. It's true, he had created the abomination that is called the Heart of Rome as a sort of tribute to the demon, but despite that, it still chose Varaxis over him. He has no powers anymore. He's just a man as any, and now he wants to end Caligula's legacy for good. Laurentius thinks for a moment, and then responds that Junius must have only been a temporary vessel for the demon, and it shows someone stronger. However, he surmises that Varaxis isn't its final destination either. Laurentius then changes the subject, pointedly asking Junius why he killed his wife. Junius covers his face in shame, and answers that he knew Laurentius was after him, and he wanted to send a message. But he didn't do it to scare him off. No. Junius did it because, deep down, a part of him wanted to be stopped, and he knew killing her would ensure that Laurentius would never quit. In a voice of quivering anger, Laurentius asks where she is and how to find her. Junius sadly replies that her soul is trapped in the box, and the only way to free her would be to get their hands on it. So, after having learned everything he needs, Laurentius stoically unsheaths his sword, prepared to put Junius down for his crimes. But before he can do so, Aulus bursts into the room. He's happy to see that Laurentius is finally awake, because apparently Agrippina needs to speak with him, and there's no time to spare. So Laurentius rushes over to the palace, where he finds Agrippina on a balcony, staring out over the city. Laurentius asks her what it is she needs, and she tries to seduce the soldier, but gets nothing in return. Agrippina still takes her clothes off, though, because she wants him to see all the scars Caligula left her. In a state of complete vulnerability, she acknowledges that she's ambitious, greedy, and opportunistic. But Agrippina says she does truly love Rome, and above all else, everything she does, she's doing in order to save it. She reiterates to Laurentius that the Caligula demon wants her son, and if it gets him, Rome will burn in hellfire. So Laurentius must destroy it, whatever means necessary. And as a final parting message, Agrippina whispers to the soldier that from this point forward he can trust no one, not even her, and that they can never meet again. Meanwhile, elsewhere in the palace, Nero is about to bite into some Roman cake when his demon Belial counsels him that it smells funny. So Nero beckons a nearby slave, claiming something's wrong with his cake. The servant hesitates, though, and that's all it takes to send Nero into a frothing rage. He pimp-slaps the guy with his lyre and demands to know who is trying to poison him. But Nero's got more immediate problems on his plate, because out of the shadows step out a band of assassins wielding daggers. Nero asks if the demon is going to do anything about this, and after a momentary pause, hundreds of locusts and maggots spawn out of nowhere, and they smother his attackers. From there, we return to Laurentius, who hurriedly returns to Junius's house. He barges through the front door, dramatically declaring that time's run out and they need to act fast. Agrippina can no longer help them, and he could smell the desperation on her. So Laurentius orders Aulus to join Junius in returning to the tunnels in order to destroy the heart of Rome, as it's an abomination that feeds on emptiness and despair. As for Laurentius himself, well, he informs the two that he's going after Varaxus by himself, because he's going to get the box back. Junius protests, arguing that the soldier will need his help, but Laurentius calls him out for just wanting to get the box back, and he tells Junius that if he's actually serious about redeeming himself, he will go assist Aulus in eliminating the creature he created. Laurentius strides out under the gray skies, his cloak bellowing in the wind. He's ready to confront Varaxus, but he's also undergone a mind shift of sorts. Because now he thinks that his biggest mistake in all of this was ever trying to stop the inevitable. He was foolish to think that such evil could ever be vanquished, and his wife paid for it. When Laurentius looks around him, all he sees are avatars of corruption. Varaxus, Nero, Pallas, Agrippina, all of them viciously sordid and depraved. Rome can't be saved. This cycle's never going to stop. But what's more, Laurentius doesn't even care anymore. All he wants to do is save his wife's soul before it all burns down. In any event, down in the tunnels, Junius and Aulus are on the prowl. The two clearly don't like each other that much, but they try to put aside their differences to get the job done. However, Aulus just wasn't built for this sort of thing, and the increasing coldness washing over him wears him down, and at a certain point he cannot go on. Aulus beseeches Junius to keep his word and complete the mission, but he has no reason to fear, because the olive farmer replies that his heart harbors no more temptation. So Junius presses on solo into the heart of Rome. When he gets to the center, he's unsurprised to find the specter of his mother there, but he knows she's not real, and that's not actually her. Junius is a new man now, and it's time to let go. So Junius takes a deep breath, and he tosses his torch on top of the flesh pile, igniting a flame that will purify the dark underbelly of Rome. Meanwhile, on the surface, it didn't take long for Laurentius to locate Varaxus, just a little interrogation of the local citizenry. But in any case, Varaxus looks terrible and very sick, and he asks what Laurentius wants with him. The soldier responds that he's not there for the gladiator, he's there to make a deal with the Caligula demon. And so Laurentius puts forward the following. He promises that if Caligula releases his wife's soul, he will offer his own, and he will immediately deliver the demon to his true destination. All this talk enrages Varaxus, and he madly swings his sword at our hero. Through the advances and parries, Laurentius keeps trying to convince the Caligula demon. He promises that his word is his bond, and he asks if the demon really wants to risk being stuck in a dumb brute like Varaxis forever. Laurentius then manages to ram his sword deep into the gladiator's stomach. Varaxis howls in pain and uppercuts the soldier in the face, knocking him down. The insane man then rips the sword out of his body, and he's about to kill Laurentius with it, when the soldier promises one last time that the demon can have the whole world for all he cares, in exchange for just bringing peace to one soul. And with that, Varaxis freezes and starts gurgling. Spit and bile pour out of his mouth as he falls to his knees. And though Varaxis tries with all his might to keep it down, the box forcefully ejects itself out of him, and the gladiator bleeds out on the floor from his wounds. Laurentius reaches out for the box, and he's instantly transported to the soul world. But this time, the real Julia smiles lovingly back at him. The two embrace, reunited in a place beyond space and time. But, of course, it was not fated to last. Laurentius tells her that her soul is finally free, and she may rest now. Julia tenderly looks at him and quietly asks if she really must walk this path alone, but Laurentius is never able to answer. He reawakens and finds himself back there on the wooden floor. He still has his end of the deal to live up to. So Laurentius walks outside, and while he feels great physically, there's still something off. He feels this deep, gnawing hunger. He notices a young boy walking by who shines like a star to him for some reason, and without a second thought, Laurentius tightly clutches the boy's neck, indifferent to the kid's beet-red face and sobbing. But then, a voice behind him snaps him out of it. It's Junius, begging him to stop. And Laurentius realizes in shame what he's almost just done. And so he finally understands. It's the box, and it can corrupt anyone. Laurentius shows Junius he has it, and lets him know that he's going to die without it, but he must complete the bargain. Laurentius steadies himself, and he firmly grips Junius's hand. He warns his young friend that terrible things are coming. The two men take each other in for a moment, and then they part ways for the final time. Junius watches as the silhouette of Laurentius grows smaller and smaller, never knowing that in their last moments together, the soldier finally understood and forgave him. We cut to black and return some hours later. Agrippina is basking on the palace balcony when she is startled by the sudden appearance of her son. Nero looks up at her innocently and says that he's come to apologize for the way he's been acting lately. He's not been himself, but he's cast out the demon Belial now. Nero tightly hugs his mom and whimpers that all he's ever wanted was to make her proud. The boy pauses and asks Agrippina if it's too late for them. She somberly replies that no, it's never too late, and with tears streaming down her face, she plunges a dagger into the back of Nero. But no sooner than he falls does he get back up, deriding his mother's feeble attempt at stopping him. Except now he stops calling Agrippina his mother, and instead starts referring to her as his sister. Agrippina's heart drops, but she realizes it's all over, and so she bows her head in deference to her lord, Caligula. From there, we move to what is essentially a weird epilogue of sorts. We see Claudius eating out Agrippina, And while he's doing that, she breaches the subject that instead of continuing to try to kill Nero, the emperor should just adopt him and make him his official heir so the boy can no longer be used against him. Claudius says he'll think about it, and we then find out that the Caligula-possessed Nero is actually watching all of this, obscured in the corner, with a smile on his face. And beside him, in a deputy capacity, is Belial, now in human form. And so the series ends with Nero vowing that one day all of Rome will once again kneel before him. And on that day, Agrippina will burn with the rest of them. And thus so concludes the wild story of the mad emperor Caligula.
Kowalski, analysis.
Well, that was, quite frankly, pretty insane. There's a lot to digest here, but what are your thoughts on today's story? That is, if you even made it this far. I'm guessing a lot of people tapped out at certain various points along the way, but nevertheless, make sure to share your thoughts in the comment section down below. Also, I'm curious what you guys thought about this video's length. Perhaps I'll occasionally do more mega episodes like this in the future. But yeah, not gonna lie, it was a lot of work. But yeah. But enough with all that, I guess. Let's do some analysis here. I'll try to keep it relatively brief because even I'm kind of sick of myself at this point, but yeah. Anyway, for commentary purposes, I'm going to heavily distinguish between the original Caligula miniseries and its sequel, Heart of Rome. That is to say that everything I'm about to say is solely about the first Caligula volume. Alright, so in short, I would say that the existence of this Caligula book, its very existence, kind of fascinates me. It's truly a unique specimen, a kind of one-of-a-kind item. I mean, at face value, it's an extreme horror story that unflinchingly violates every single line of morality and decency. There really are no sacred cows, and all that's been done before, sure, but Caligula does it in an entirely distinctive manner. Right, so, let's say, okay, if we were to say that, the standard extreme horror depravity is a bullet in this analogy, well, then the gun in this particular case that's executing this mechanics would be this strange and peculiar amalgamation of occult supernaturalism, pseudo-theology, and this ancient Roman historical setting. There's just nothing quite like it. I don't even know what to say. But beyond that, and this is where things get a little bit weird, I feel like there's something I'm kind of missing. There's something kind of deeper going on here that I can't quite name. Maybe it's because I'm sleep deprived, or maybe I'm just simply not clever enough, but there's something else going on with this book that I can't quite put into words. Even that is creating probably so many more questions. I'm not trying to be obscure or vague. Let's just move on, okay? In terms of the story qualities going on here, I found Junius's arc to be quite interesting. It was a roller coaster for sure. He went on a journey from an obscure farmer to avenging crusader, to then being corrupted by the madness and power around him. Junius is beaten and broken down. His sense of self and his purpose is shattered, even almost voluntarily given up. But when the moment arrives, despite the psychological and physical scarring, he does the right thing, only to immediately fall back into the darkness. Definitely not a linear path, but the trail from zero to hero and then to fallen angel is a pretty real and interesting one to me. But whatever the case, to better understand this work, let's see what the author, David Lapham, had to say about it in an interview he did with Comic Book Resources in 2011. The interviewer basically asks him where the idea of the story came from, and Lapham responds that Avatar's publisher, William Christensen, wanted to do a Caligula book, so the spark extends from him. My thought, besides it being fun to do a period book, is that if you're going to do a historical horror piece, why not Caligula? The guy's name is synonymous with depravity, excess, and insanity. That's pretty funny that doing a Caligula story wasn't even Lapham's idea. He definitely brought his own signature flair to it, which we'll get into later, but yeah. Though, now that I think about it, perhaps I shouldn't be surprised as I am at the novelty of using Caligula as a subject. I guess he already has a shadow in the cultural zeitgeist, from films to books to plays and whatnot. It's just that I don't think I've ever heard a single person, IRL, ever even utter the name Caligula before. So him being used as a fictional subject, I guess, is not at all intuitive to me, but whatever. All of this kind of leads into another question. The interviewer asks Lapham about the relation between the fictional and historical Caligula, and Lapham answers that, on the one hand, much about the real Caligula is lost to time, so nobody really knows who the real Caligula is. So maybe mine is spot on, except for the supernatural part, but hey, maybe that's real too. I'm approaching it from the perspective that every vile rumor that could possibly be tied to Caligula is fact. Then I make up more stuff. A pretty candid answer, which feeds into my bafflement from earlier. From a purely historical standpoint, we actually do know almost nothing about the real Caligula. You can basically read every single primary source and become an expert on Caligula in a day. There are basically only 3 accounts of his life and reign that survived, and like 90% of everything we know about him is sourced from just one of them, Suetonius's The 12 Caesars. But even that was compiled like 80 years after Caligula's death, and modern historiographers debate the extent to which it was either, exaggerated gossip, political propaganda, or, genuinely historically accurate content. But I guess, yes, it's possible that Caligula may have been slandered. But whatever the case, practically everything in Caligula Volume 1 is an exaggeration of something in Suetonius' book. An exaggeration of an exaggeration, if you will. But that's just a little fun trivia, I guess. But let's now move on to discussing Volume 2, Caligula, Heart of Rome. This one, in my opinion, is vastly inferior to the first volume. It just didn't make that much sense, okay? Like, for example, what exactly was the Heart of Rome supposed to be, and what was its significance to the broader story? Good question. I think that overall, the Caligula series had the same strengths and weaknesses as something like Lapham's Ferals, if you are familiar. As for positives, both of them established these, really creative rules and processes in universe for how things work. In this story, I'm referring to the Soul Collection, Silver Box swallowing, and demonic possession thing. In Ferals, that would be like the whole werewolf process. It's really cool and original. However, as with Ferals, as Caligula went on, Lapham seems to have tried to add so many new characters, twists, and factions that the story kind of gets overly complicated and completely collapses by the end. What do I mean by this? Like, for example, why did we need 3 different demons in Heart of Rome? Like, what service to the story did having the Caligula demon, Belial, and Pallas running around do? Seemingly nothing. It was all pretty ultimately significant. What even happened to Pallas anyway? Where'd he go, and what was his deal? I'm not trying to be a hater, though, don't get me wrong. I kind of like Volume 1 in a strange way, or at least I recognize it as an oddity that I simply must own and contemplate. but Volume 2 is more of a miss for me. I'll end this review by briefly remarking on the art by Germán Nóbile. I liked it, and I think it fit the series perfectly. It was incredibly vile and ugly, while at the same time looking like strangely good, I guess. Like, the art looked like little oil paintings almost, but the faces and actions depicted are just so, disgusting and depraved. And I guess I'm kind of curious how artists can, affect this style. As I imagine that in art schools, they likely teach you how to make things look beautiful and aesthetic, So I'm wondering how artists can be masters of making things look so ugly and gross. Just kind of interesting, I guess. I will say though that the art kind of fell off in the back half and middle of Heart of Rome. I don't know if the artist had deadline issues or something, but it kind of looked like incomplete sketches. But whatever. But that about does it for today's mega video. If you enjoyed today's content, make sure to hit the like and subscribe button. Alright, until next time, I will thank you for watching, and I hope you have a good one.